Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Realcomm Live. Every week I say it, this is going to be a great episode, and they usually are. This one is extremely special to me because our guest, Scott Morey, president of WeWork Workplace and Technology, is not just a peer, but I would call Scott a friend. We go back easily 20, possibly 25 years. I remember the first time I walked into Scott's office in Chicago at Equity Office, where he was the CIO. And just think about what I'm about to say. Scott was going on and on about the idea of analyzing the iterations of motors inside equipment in the buildings in an attempt to provide information or predictive analytics on when that device might fail. Okay, think about that. 20 plus years ago, that kind of mind. No surprise that his career has been one of the most stellars in the industry. Top consultant, worked with top real estate companies, did a stint in Africa, and to come back and end up being the chief technology person for WeWork and the Workplace and Technology. Just an unbelievable career. So it's going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk about the future of work, flex space, and nobody better than WeWork to tell us what the heck is going on in that space. Before we get started, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge what's going on in Ukraine. A terrible situation. Wanting to let you know our thoughts and prayers are with all those folks who are suffering that terrible situation, and we all hope that it resolves quickly and peacefully. So with that, before I bring on Scott, we're going to show you a quick video of WeWork to give you some context, and then be prepared for a great conversation. All right. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you? Appreciate the kind introduction.
Well, yeah, we're going to get to a little bit more detail of that in a second, but I wanted to ask you, you noticed our bumper that we started the show with? It was from Nashville. I think that was actually you on the stage, if I remember correctly.
That was an amazing forum, and I think it might have been me on the stage. You and I and Wayne Pryor, right, had done something.
Talking about prop tech. Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I've been telling a lot of folks lately that it's easy to have an opinion, but it's more difficult to have an opinion that's backed up by experience and credentials. Because with the internet today, everybody can jump on and say whatever they want, and that's fine. I'm all for free speech, but to have credentials and experience means a lot. Honestly, as I said in the opening, your career is storied. You've really run a gamut of different angles and different positions in the industry, all with great success. Would you mind giving the audience a quick rundown of your career, just so they have the context of where you're coming from as we get into this conversation?
Well, I would say I've been quite, as you go through it, fortunate on given opportunities to do certain things. You and I have talked about that before. I started working in the late 80s, 1988. That was at Arthur Andersen, and 89 was my first real estate project. And I've stayed in real estate in some form of technology since. You and I, for a long time, would call real estate and technology an oxymoron, which I think it might have been at the beginning. I ultimately ended up with a firm called Kent Leventhal. Ernst & Young bought them. A lot of us in this industry came out of that group. I think about Dave Stanford, a lot of folks out of Real Foundations and 111 and Cone and in the industry side as well. Anyway, I left. I was a partner at E&Y. Left at 2000. I joined Equity Office Properties at the time. Later, through acquisitions, became where you and I met, the first S&P 500 real estate company with the growth of the REITs in the 90s. I left there in 2004. Went back into advisory in Chicago on these very topics: technology and real estate and operations and all that kind of stuff. London in 2006, doing the same thing. I was expanding at the time as Real Foundations offices in Europe. 2008, I went to Nigeria. A lot of folks like yourself were wondering what I was doing. I was down there in a 2-year contract, really in real estate, but much more less tech. Right. So it was a large developer in West Africa. Then joined Alvarez Marsal during the fallout, right? And I was running their real estate practice in EMEA. Joined Sandeep Mithrani General Growth in 2011 as part of that turnaround. Left in 17. did some advisory work, and then now, of course, with WeWork, I joined a little bit less than a year ago. So the lucky part is I've been able to build on what I've done before. And then again, I think I've been really fortunate in having people I've worked with and for that value the skills that folks like you and I bring.
Yeah. And I do think that word experience means something. Roads not to travel down. You can see the horizon much easier because you've been there. And I think we can never lose sight of how important experience is, especially as in the topic we're about to discuss. So let's talk about your first year at WeWork, 10 months a year. The future of work, how you guys are going to capitalize on it, as disruption. Some of the things that you were tasked with doing. Can you give us a little oversight or overview of what that looked like?
Yeah, happy to. When I joined, a lot of the hard work on the restructuring was done, right? Which goes back to late kind of 2019, 2020. And so I came in really trying to reinforce what we would call our three main kind of areas or streams of business or legs. Our core business, which is what it is, right? Like we lease and build out space and do that. But actually, how do we expand that in more creative ways, which we'll talk about? And how do we finance it differently, or how do we structure it differently, but add to the inventory in a high growth market? The second wheel is our access product. So all access on demand, which really was invented by WeWork. Mm-hmm. And you had a business there on all access that launched in late 2020 that was over $100 million business in the last year, put it in perspective. Wow. And then on demand, like it sounds. And then the third piece, which was not launched, but we've since launched, is the SaaS business. So we've extended our technology in ways that add value to our enterprise customers and other customers in their use of WeWork space, but in their use of their own WeWork space. So my title, as you said earlier, is President of Technology and what we call WeWork Workplace, and WeWork Workplace is that SaaS offering.
Right. So, and you and I have been having this conversation for a long time. Prior to the pandemic, the digital transformation, not just of the real estate industry, but of society as a whole. You think back to the laptop computer was really the first opportunity for a business person to take their office with them and go, right? So that's probably mid 80s, if I think back. So now we got all these professionals, when you were working in the consulting business, running around clients. And right up until the pandemic, it was moving at a fairly good clip. People were working from Starbucks and airports and homes. But then came the pandemic and gave the whole world this experiment of working from home. And even people who did not believe in it were forced to do it, right? So from a 30,000 foot level, what happened during the pandemic? And is it going to be short-lived, or are those patterns and habits ingrained in people forever? What does the workplace look post-pandemic?
Let me do a real short parallel on retail, right? Jerry Yang covered Time Magazine, I think 2000 something, right? Long time ago. Malls are dead, right? And I think it was around 2000, 2001, if my memory's right. And really the inflection of what happened with retail, I would argue, has happened the last really kind of 6 to 8 years. And there's a parallel there. And what the parallel is that there were already alternative formats for retail, but the combination of technology and those forms empowered the consumer and put them in control. So now you go to, let's talk about office, is not necessarily a new format. There's parts of it that are new, right? And I think what's happened now is, one, any preconceived ideas people had of how we could work remotely and be effective or not have been dispelled. There's still value in being together, which we'll talk about. But suddenly now the individual is empowered. And you've got technology and alternative formats that allow people to engage in space in more dynamic ways for the hour, for the day, for the week, in different formats. And I don't think that empowerment is going to shift at all. And so the last 2 years amplified that environment, which was already underway, right? And really put a position where folks as individuals now have a choice based upon the formats that are now offered, like ours, products in the marketplace, based upon technology that allow them to engage in ways that put them in complete control. That's what's different. And I think it's similar to retail of what happened with consumers.
They got a real choice. They got a
100%.
Real choice. So if you think about occupancy or utilization pre-pandemic, our numbers were 35-ish to 40 not occupancy or as a counter to vacancy. I'm talking about utilization, the time that the space was used. We call it 35, 40%. That was pre-pandemic. Okay. Once the pandemic hit, New York was at 1%. San Francisco, I understand today is still sub 20%. So the big question, and it was really interesting to watch the corporate tenants deal with this. The goal line kept getting moved every 3 months. Well, it'll be at Christmas. No, it's the spring. Well, maybe it's the summer. It'll be after Labor Day. We heard that for 2 years now, right? So here's the question. When, why, and to what extent will we see workers come back at some kind of scale, and what size is that scale?
So I think you take flex space today is 2% of all office space, right? So then you say, and I shared some stats back right when we were together earlier this year at your conference. I'll give you a recent one. So we're 0.5% of that 2%, roughly, to put in perspective, with 50 million square feet. You take the third quarter of last year, and again, we're 0.5% of the inventory. We were 9% of the entire US's leasing volume. It's happening already within the format. Now, if you look statistically through, right, I'm not going to talk about Q1, obviously we're public, but you look last year, we've been on the upswing for several months starting last year when you look at us sort of going on, statistically. So on that basis, it's happening. It's just not happening in the traditional landlord format. Like, we are picking up, and our category, right, is picking up that volume. And I shared this before, we were briefly catching up, but I was in New York yesterday, and I was at a property ours on 14th Street, and we're 90+% occupied.
Wow.
And yesterday I was there, not just contractually, physically, like
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, physically.
Yeah, unbelievable, right? Kind of in the scheme of things. And so we're continuing to see our occupancy go up on an aggregate basis. If my memory's right, at the end of last year, we were just below 70%. I think we were at 66% occupancy. And that trend, continue to see, or hopeful to continue to see that going forward. But the reality is, on the leasing activity alone, the corporations of America and the world, really, right? Because we're in different markets in the UK or in India or China, these other places. We're picking up the volume. No one is leasing at the same level that we're leasing in any of these other formats.
Boy, if that's not an indication of what life's going to look like post-pandemic. And the other thing that I think is real interesting is it's real easy for us to talk about Class A, because that's kind of the world we all grew up in, right? We kind of hung together and knew each other. But what nobody's talking about is B and C, right? That small accounting firm in that suburban office that's figured out how to work remotely. Why go back to the 10,000, 20,000 square feet? Why not, and you and I talked about this in prep. There's people we know that have shut their offices down and have done contracts with you guys or others for the flex space. And I think that it's something that the industry needs to be paying a lot of attention to.
But think this way. I think it's not just, we want 100,000 square feet. We have people taking over 100,000 square feet for us as headquarters, like Santander would be an example of that recently. But what it is, our average term length is 20 months. It's not a 7-year average lease. And so and I think of flex space. Flex there's two parts to it. There's the contractual structure. You want the hour, you want the day, you want the week, you want the month, you want the year, or whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. And there's flex in formats. I want collaborative space. I want hub space. I want individual space. To me, flex is sort of right within those barriers. And I think companies are finding out the right balance and then leveraging technology to get better use of it. So not just the analytics on usage. We've got companies, maybe I'm making it up hypothetically, but there's a lot of real stories about it. They might have 1,000 people in a market, and they might have 400 seats with us. And we're using our technology in effect for how we help them organize around and utilize that space. And so it's quite fascinating, actually.
Well, at the end of the day, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but it's just extreme efficiency in a market that was very inefficient. 35% utilization across the board. And that's Monday morning, 9 to 5. If you do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, actual utilization on a weekly basis is sub 10%. Right. So you guys have just figured out how to pick up and hedge that inefficiency in an extraordinary way. And then we lay on global warming and climate and time management, all the other things, a lot of good reasons pointing to your model. All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some technology that makes up a hybrid flex space And nobody better to talk to than WeWork. Be right back.
The way we think about the office has changed. When you need to manage dynamic work models, new employee expectations, and keep up with compliance, you need a mobile-first, data-powered strategy and a partner that understands the building of the future because they're inventing it. It's time for real-time visibility over your workforce and your space, so you can track, communicate, plan, and optimize, whether you manage one site or many. Honeywell Sign makes it easy to keep your workforce working, no matter what the future holds.
All right. So we've been throwing around the word hybrid and flex, pretty regularly now. Let's get a little granular. What we've experienced in the hybrid, at least from an online or a physical and an online, is to make the virtual world and the physical world ubiquitous, right? So everybody's getting all freaked out about the metaverse, and we're all going to be meeting in the metaverse. I believe to some extent we will be meeting in the metaverse, just like you and I are doing this right now. But I still believe there's an incredible need for humans to be together. So hence the word hybrid, a little bit of online, a little bit of physical. Tell me what is going to make a WeWork office unique in the next 24, 36 months. What technology, what applications, what features are we going to see when we walk into an office that says, this is different than what I'm used to?
Well, I think I'm going to answer it because I think there's three tranches actually. There's a pure we're meeting in person or right around physical space. There's the hybrid, then you're sort of the full remote, right, or virtual actually, which I think is now turning into more of a metaverse conversation. I think on the pure physical product, we spent a lot of time around purposeful design and the structure around that. And so I'll refer. I think you've met him, Paco Underhill, right? Is kind of one of his fortes. Actually, it's more than that. Is on consumer behavior on retail. And he started to do more science, right? He's a really interesting guy around what he would call collision points in office space. We haven't used him directly. I was catching up with him when he was sharing the story. And we would call that the water cooler in the back, right? Yep. Back in the day, like the water cooler conversation. So I think we're getting more purposeful and intentful, I think, around the physical design and the layout, and then in a modular basis to make it easier and more dynamic to change those formats. But there's a science there that's very distinct, and I think not just unique to WeWork, but I think we've done a great job, and we're continuing to advance it. If you look at the stuff we're doing today versus what we did before, it's a different experience. The second one is around the seamlessness on a technology and hybrid basis, and there's an infrastructure part of this Wi-Fi and connecting, or I think I've got 14,000 printers. You could print anywhere, and then globally with your black card, put it on the thing and your piece of paper, or whatever it is you're going to have print out. So the seamlessness aspect to that interaction.
Ubiquitous. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. But the taking that further, we spent a lot of time on. I think I've got 12,000 video conference rooms with audio visual, and we're constantly trying out different formats and screens and more. You and I would use the word more immersive, which tends to be right. Positive in that experience. I mean, that technology it just got amplified in the demand for that through this cycle. And, we're opening labs in places to effectively, showcase that, but that'll always be something extremely important to us because we are in this new reality. And there was I don't want to name it the company, but they went literally from like 1,000 to 14,000 employees in 3 years. I was meeting with their head of the workforce. And he used this term equity, which of course a lot of people equate to economic equity, which is fair, right? His right. Equity was whether I'm remote or not remote or split up, it's got to be the same experience for everybody. He's totally right, 100%. And I think that's the same path, we're going down. And again, we're fortunate to position the volume of people we have within the mix. I think I've got something like 600,000 membership. I could have hundreds of thousands of people every day that are on my infrastructure. But how do we advance that and make it, that much better? The metaverse is fascinating, more at a personal level. I'm reading the same thing probably that we're all reading. There is something there, and I think look at it a different way though, Jim. Too is like I don't want to mention the companies. I'm not sure if they want me to mention them, but one is about metaverse on sort of this broader basis. But there's some really interesting hybrid formats relative to floor plan level, more immersive things, right? About where people are and how you connect in the physical and digital sense, and so. I think, like anything, the pendulums, there's it's a shiny object, right, and it might be a little bit too shiny. But there's some real value there, I think, again, about digitally in our laptops that you and I are on, and how we work better together regardless of
Well,
where we are.
again, it goes back to that experience I opened up with. I mean, yes, there's an incredible amount of hype, too much hype. We're going to see it go straight up. But for those of us who've been around a little bit, what you're going to do is you're going to look for those nuggets along the way that when this thing corrects, they're going to be, think about the early days with CoStar and LoopNet, right? Before the .com. I mean, think of the companies that came out of that after it crashed. Some really good, big companies, right? So I know you guys are playing around with some immersive technologies. In our general session this year, we had 5 speakers on the stage, and we brought 2 of them in virtually at scale. So they were 6 feet tall, sitting at desks. And it wasn't perfect. We kind of hacked it, but it kind of gave people a sense. We're going to be taking that to the next level at our conference coming up in June in Orlando. What are you seeing on the immersive side? Anything that's really intriguing you and you're finding interesting?
The interesting part, just talk about it before I get specific, just the general category. You and I know when we see new technology, it's never priced effectively to scale.
Correct.
Right? And they're chunky, actually. And so I'm seeing amazing innovation on things like holograms and sort of other categories, but it's not in a fashion that makes it scalable to a broader market. And so we always see these big investment curves, things get repriced, and someone comes in and develops a way effectively to scale it in mass. We're in the early part of those cycles. And so there's great technology. I've seen the stuff that you've been playing around with, and we've got some stuff that we've been playing around with, but it's not in a basis that would make cost-effective sense to deploy it on a broader basis.
Yeah, there's not many people I could ask this question. I mean, we had teleportation at Realcomm in 2001. Okay, and when we teleported Malcolm King in from London, and he showed up on the stage like a Star Trek character, everybody gasped, right? So that was 21 years ago. Why hasn't that whole industry developed to the point where we are ready to scale? Why are we, it seems like there's a chunk of time there that was ignored because the technology, frankly, hasn't really improved that much since 2001. Any thoughts on that?
I think the market wasn't ready. And I think in the same way we're talking about the inflection point for retail and the inflection point for office, that I think people are more accepting of that and see the value more than they had before. I mean, the way you ran your conference, it was a hologram, but it was unbelievable, actually, in the scheme of things, about how many people and the way we connected in the physical and digital sense. And that forum, in a physical conference forum or remote conference forum, was pretty unique.
Yeah, we're probably on our 6th iteration of hybrid. And boy, you talk about learning curve and scars. And guess what? You can call the baseball game all you want from the first row, unless you're at that plate striking out. And that's a message to our industry, to the real estate industry. You guys are constantly swinging the bat, trying new things. And there's still, I've spent my whole career in this industry, a tremendous resistance to really trying innovative new things, despite all the money that's being thrown at these things. All right, we're going to have time for a couple more questions. Who are going to be the winners and the losers? If you answer this one quick, because I got one final. Who are going to be the winners and the losers in this transformation, digital transformation, hybrid work, virtual, metaverse world, physical, virtual, and everything in between? Who wins and who loses?
I think the individual wins in the end because of choice and the empowerment, as we were talking about earlier.
Great.
It's harder to say on who loses because I don't think it's black and white again. I think it's about a recalibration of these hybrid, both there's a need for a long-term lease structure in traditional formats, a need for the shorter, in the same way that you and I saw going to retail. Online book sales went all the way up to like 50-something% and recalibrated, if my memory's right, in the 40s. There's a natural calibration here that needs to occur. And so obviously those that hold out longer, that they don't think there's some validity to this, I think it's going to be a little bit more painful for them. But I think in the end, the individual wins. Our members win, our customers win, us as individual workers in the workforce win.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, I got another 10 questions that I know we're not going to be able to get to, but I'm going to ask you this. I want to have you back and talk about the impact to cities. Because our buildings all sit in big cities, in small cities, and medium-sized cities. But you're aware of this migration going on, and into smaller towns, and nobody better than WeWork in the way you guys locate your offices to have that conversation with. So if you're open to, I'd love to have you back and have that conversation. All right, final question. Without disclosing any secret sauce, or you'll have to come and kill me. What new, crazy, cool, innovative things can we see from WeWork in the next 12, 18 months?
I think what I can talk about at least, I am really excited around the ways that we're using analytics and engagement to create the best experiences for our customers within the use of our space, both remotely and then in person. I'm in such a unique place because I've got, again, hundreds of thousands of people coming through the space. I control the physical space and the format within it, and I control the digital experience as well. So whether that's my member app or our website or whatever it may be. So I'm in this super unique place to create an amazing experience for people in ways that no one else can. There's no one in the same position. You might say in corporate America, because they control their own space, right? But they're not in this business.
No.
And all we're doing every day is we don't just talk about it, we're living in it. And we're going to do some really cool things, I think.
Well, and think about it. One corporation has one viewpoint. Theirs. You talk to all the corporations and all the tenants, so your perspective is much, much wider. One final thought. I know you said you were in New York, and it was crowded and bustling and high energy. Let's end on a real positive note. What was it like getting back into a crowded office?
I got to tell you, it was awesome, to be honest with you. And just the energy and the vibe. I love hybrid, and I love working remotely, and I love kind of having my own space. But I really enjoy when I find myself in those situations, and I can't wait to be in those more in the future.
Cool. Scott, I know how busy you are. I hope we have many more conversations. It's been a joy, not just today, but for probably close to 25 years. You're one of the smartest guys I know, and I always learn something. So
thank you. Appreciate it, Jim.
Thanks for being here. Be well. All right. With that, let's bring on Howard Berger, who is going to give us some news. Howard, I'm sure you enjoyed that conversation. That goes, the conversations with Scott go way back, and they're always great.
They're always great. I mean, Scott is he's a very special guy.
Yep.
And it was a pleasure having him on today. So thank you, Jim. Yep. And thank you, Scott, again. That was just a phenomenal conversation. So with that, I'll jump into the news. I'm going to highlight a couple of key articles from our weekly briefing. It goes out every Thursday morning. So our lead article this week came from Byron Lopez. He's Director of Operational Technology for Kilroy Realty. In this article, Byron articulates the post-pandemic value proposition for the office in alignment with our conversation today, and why it's important to consider a hybrid approach where the office experience is frictionless and enjoyable. Now, Kilroy's really been at the forefront of smart buildings for years now. They've developed a scalable portfolio strategy, and they're creating buildings that are physically, digitally secure, adaptable, sustainable, and tenant-centric. Now, it's true that employees may not necessarily need the office to effectively do their job. I mean, since most of us know that with the right technology, we can get our work done from home, Starbucks, or the beach. Even so, a number of us miss the office, buildings, services, friends, colleagues, energy, but at the same time also love the convenience and comfort of being able to roll out of bed, flick on the computer, get some work done. It's a given that it's going to be a blend of both. And if creative design and innovation are applied with purpose and technology, I think both goals can be achieved. So this is a great article. Thanks, Byron. Also, as Jim mentioned a little earlier, our hearts and prayers go out to the Ukrainian people. You know, we know they're in for a rough time, and I would really encourage everyone to reach out, figure out ways that they can reach out and try to help in any way they can. Along those lines, the analysts are saying that we're now facing a higher risk of Russian cyber attacks. And Western companies really need to be on high alert and, at minimum, make sure their systems are patched against known vulnerabilities. Now, Russia started locking up websites of the Ukraine Defense Ministry and some major commercial banks with a distributed denial of service attacks. And remember the NotPetya ransomware attack in 2017? It targeted Ukrainian organizations before ravaging the rest of the world. Now, these coming attacks may not come directly from the Russian government, but they could come from criminal gangs who are going to be stepping up their own ransomware campaigns. Now, as far as retaliation from NATO, it's still a gray zone on whether these attacks warrant a legal response. But if attacks escalate beyond Ukraine, I think Putin may force the world to rewrite the rule book for this aspect of modern warfare. So moving back to New York and the World Trade Center, earlier this month, Silverstein Properties introduced contactless access to 7 World Trade by using an employee badge in Apple Wallet. So now employees can badge into office buildings, tenant floors, fitness centers, amenity spaces with their iPhone or Apple Watch. This leverages Silverstein's Inspire app, that's their tenant app, to set up Apple Wallet. Then you just unlock the phone, hold the device close to an NFC near field communication enabled lock. And this takes advantage of all the privacy and security built into the Apple devices. I'm like, well, why didn't anyone think of this before? So finally, just a quick shout out to Remlogix. So Remlogix, they're a cloud-based commercial real estate ERP that they built on no-code development. They just announced a successful go-live of their accounting solution at Federal Realty Investment Trust. Now, Federal Realty is using Remlogix solution to automate the accounting and debt and lease liabilities of their 25 million square foot portfolio of 104 retail and mixed use properties. I just wanted to say congratulations, Remlogix, on this milestone implementation. It's been a while coming, and best of luck with it. So I'm out of time. That's it for me today. Thank you all for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you.
Howard, I just got to say on the cyber story, which was a pretty important one. This is what we've been talking about for 5 years, right? And I think as an industry, we've got to get to the bottom of why do we see these problems, these issues, these opportunities early, but it takes us so long to embrace. Whether it's the teleportation technology we talked about earlier, or cloud in the early or the late 90s. We've been talking about cyber with the Real Estate Cyber Consortium. We need everybody to take a sober look at their infrastructure, both enterprise and the building level, and don't reinvent the wheel. REC is there to help folks understand and leverage each other. So I would encourage each of you to go up to the Real Estate Cyber Consortium website, learn more about it, and get involved. Together we
get
can
involved, get educated, learn what you can do now to decrease your threat profile.
Exactly.
To these actors. There's really, at this point now, with the geopolitical strain, there's no time to wait.
No.
And I'd say that's the biggest thing that keeps me up at night. Right.
Yeah, a lot keeps me up, and that being one of them. So Howard, thank you. Great job. We'll see you next week, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. All right. So before we wrap for this week, let's hear from our final sponsor, and I'll be right back to tell you about next week.
All workplaces are changing. iOffice has expanded our family of cloud-based software, so you have enterprise solutions that grow with you. We're helping you connect workplace experience and asset management to create a more agile environment for employees and better outcomes for the world.
All right. So next week, what's the topic? 5G CBRS. We've been on this one for about 3-4 years. If you remember back in Nashville, we actually had a 5G CBRS in-building wireless pavilion. We've actually been on the topic of in-building wireless for probably close to 20 years now. But this 5G movement is a big deal, especially for buildings. To do all the things that Scott was talking about, making these workplaces easy to work in and ubiquitous to the online world, you need good broadband. Of course, we've got Wi-Fi and there's cellular, that we're experienced for the last 5-10 years. But 5G is going to take everything to another level in latency and in speed. And frankly, if your buildings don't have it, you're going to find yourself in a less than competitive situation. So we have got 2 New York City powerhouses. We've got Joe Rich with Related, think Hudson Yards, and Nick Stello from Vernado, think Penn Station. There are no 2 bigger voices in New York, and not just by the size or the presence of their portfolios, but the level of innovation they do. These are 2 huge New York City owner developers that not only build beautiful buildings, but they understand the importance of technology. So next week, I'm really looking forward to speaking with Joe and Nick, and we're going to have a great conversation. If you got any questions about 5G CBRS, this is a great place to start. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. Have a great weekend. And again, thoughts and prayers to all those folks in Ukraine. And hopefully next week, we got better news on the world front, and it makes it a little bit easier to have our conversation on 5G. Everybody have a great weekend. Be well.